These true crime stories are from unsolved FBI case files that were reopened and finally solved. Although the mysteries did become cold case files, FBI agents are skilled when it comes to criminal investigations, conducting raids and closing cold cases once and for all, even if the true story behind a crime mystery is unsolved until decades later. In July of 1991, law enforcement officers in Michigan responded to a traffic emergency that would turn into an unbelievable true crime story with an unexpected ending. Four gangsters, Eugene DeRoy, Robert Siegel, Francis Mazza, and Carmen Janis, had called in a phony emergency to distract from their true crime. While law enforcement agents rushed to investigate a major roadway collision that didn't exist, the four notorious gangsters rushed to a local bank to commit one of the biggest bank robberies in Michigan history. Their plan had given these criminals an 8-minute window to complete a bank heist and get out fast. To disguise their true identities, the crime experts wore masks of ex-presidents, just like in the movie Point Break, a recent film at the time. The on-duty bank manager and teller fully complied without incident, and since the experienced criminal masterminds had perfectly timed the heist over Labor Day weekend, the vaults hadn't been emptied and still contained over $359,000 for the taking. By the time FBI agents had begun their investigation into the robbery, the culprits were already well on their way back to their Chicago hideout. There was very little evidence for FBI investigators to work with at the scene of the crime. Despite years of investigation, the unsolved mystery eventually went into the FBI cold case files and seemed unlikely to ever be figured out. Meanwhile, to hide from FBI agents, Carmen cut off contact with everyone he knew. Even his closest children assumed that their father had passed on. But the true story behind this crime didn't come out until 2008. Cold case investigators would have a huge break solving the unsolved mystery 17 years later. In one of the most unexpected endings in true crime history, the bank heist was finally solved when Carmen Janis went to renew his driver's license, and his name was flagged in a criminal database. The notorious gangster's FBI files were reopened by cold case detectives for further examination. Using the most recent information from his driver's license application, the FBI raided his address and placed him under arrest. The FBI cold case was solved when Carmen Janis was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay $90,000 for the bank robbery. What happened to the other criminals will have to remain untold stories for another time. The oldest cold case files ever solved by the FBI dates back thousands of years in a really weird history story that's strange but true. In 1915, archaeologists had discovered a crime scene within a 4,000-year-old discovery from Egypt. Much to their amazement, the ancient Egyptian tomb showed crime scene evidence of being raided centuries prior. Artifacts were missing, objects were strewn about, and the casket had been opened. The tomb was built for an Egyptian governor who was buried alongside his wife. However, all that was left of the famous couple was a single mummified head. Archaeologists needed to know who it belonged to so they could pay their respects and properly document the historic event. Forensic science could prove no real answers because the face was too eroded to determine if the features were masculine or feminine. For nearly a century, the strange case remained unsolved in one of the world's greatest historic mysteries. In 2009, FBI agents were contacted by a science team who needed their help in an especially fascinating investigation. The FBI was quickly brought up to date on the situation and got to work thinking of a creative solution to see this case solved. Being thousands of years old, most of the ancient body was far too old to obtain an intact sample for DNA evidence. However, as always, forensic science has a way of discovering the true story. For the past 4 years, expert scientists had tried unsuccessfully drilling into the mummy's teeth to extract tooth powder for DNA evidence. Although their scientific principles were correct, their equipment was inferior. They reasoned that FBI special agents had the forensic tools needed to see this mystery solved. During this special investigation, an FBI agent extracted tooth powder from a molar with a special needle and solved the mystery using a crime scene technique unknown to most. The tooth powder extracted was put into a top-secret liquid solution that only FBI law enforcement have access to. This solution amplifies the smallest trace samples of DNA evidence to far more detectable levels. In this case, the FBI forensic investigator found that this was male DNA, meaning the remains had to belong to the governor himself. Although the archaeologists were helped by FBI agents, the Bureau was also helping itself by solving the mystery. This amazing experiment had yielded new forensic techniques that have since helped agents discover the true story behind complex crime scenes, particularly those that involve bodies found in extreme weather settings, and especially with older cases as well. After all, to any agent who can genetically identify a mummy, cold case files that are decades old seem quite easy in comparison. In December of 1988, the Dade County Sheriff's Office in Georgia learned the body of a young woman had been found on the I-59 near the small-town community of Rising Fawn. Forensic investigators found the woman to be between 18 and 35 years old. Investigators immediately cross-referenced her with missing person cases across Georgia. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, as well as the FBI, took over the crime case. For years, investigators were unable to identify the young woman, referring to her case as the Rising Fawn Jane Doe. Decades later, cold case detectives with the FBI turned to a private forensic science company called Oglethorpe to help solve the mystery using an advanced genealogical analysis on the unidentified woman. During a preliminary examination, FBI special agents discovered unknown male DNA that was also sent for sequencing by Oglethorpe. By June of 2022, the genealogical evidence was matched to 19-year-old Stacy Lynn Chaworski, a missing woman who had mysteriously disappeared in September of 1988. According to Stacy's mother, she planned on hitchhiking from North Carolina to Michigan and went missing. The unsolved case was solved when the FBI investigation concluded that Henry Wise's DNA was found at the crime scene on Stacy as well. Henry, a stuntman, had met an unexpected ending away on the job in 1999 and escaped further punishment for his crimes. 27-year-old Daniel Danny Michael Weeks had started a romantic relationship with Patricia Esther in late 1981. Patricia was married to Army Sergeant Hubert Esther, but it appears that the relationship was failing. Patricia asked Danny, who was in a biker gang, to take out her husband. He agreed to the crime. When Sergeant Hubert was found deceased in his home in Los Angeles, Danny was sentenced to life in prison and Patricia was also charged as an accessory. Danny quickly decided that prison life wasn't for him. In 1986, he and fellow inmate James Colvin escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary and went on the run, putting them on the FBI's most wanted list. After escaping from prison, the convicts forced two women to drive them into Texas. FBI agents found James Colvin, but Danny evaded their investigations all around the country, even seeing himself on the FBI's most wanted list and almost every TV station in the land. For 2 years, Danny managed to evade the FBI and lived his life as though he was a normal person and not a criminal. Then, in 1988, the FBI received a tip and conducted a raid, which led them to solve the cold case once and for all. This tip led to the arrest of Danny, and for his escape, kidnaps, and robberies, he was given another 2 life sentences. In the 1980s, no bank in southern Florida was safe from one notorious robber. Banks would be hit indiscriminately with hostages taken and vaults raided. Local police departments struggled to respond to each incident, and each robbery fell almost at random. For years, the Florida authorities tried to capture the man responsible. The mysterious bank robber was discovered to be Robert Litchfield, and he was finally behind bars for his misdeeds. In 1986, Robert hatched a prison escape plan that, when successful, would lead to him being on the run for a year. Ever the criminal mastermind, his genius plan was to dye his prison-issue clothes blue to match the blue of prison guards and investigators. Once he managed to dye his uniform, Robert spoke to a prison dentist and began the next phase of his escape. He told the dentist that he was not from a life of crime. The true story, according to him, was that he was an investigator from Miami who had been tasked with conducting special investigations within the prison. Over time, he slowly gained the dentist's trust and convinced the dentist to hitch a ride with him out of the prison. Incredibly, Robert's prison escape worked, and he was soon out of the federal facility in Alabama that once held him. After escaping prison, Robert reunited with his beloved wife, Donna, and the two lived under assumed names. Robert continued robbing banks and committing fraud to fuel his lifestyle. The FBI quickly placed him on their 10 most wanted fugitives list, and an arrest warrant was issued. Robert and Donna traveled across the US before eventually settling in Lake Tahoe. FBI special agents were dispatched to track Robert's movements, and eventually, in 1987, they received a vital tip. They conducted a raid on a home in Nevada and found Robert and Donna living inside. Not only did they live under assumed names, but Robert had continued committing robberies, and a car was found at the property that was linked to a bank robbery in Idaho. He'd even gone as far as to get plastic surgery to change his appearance to make him look more like the famous actor Robert De Niro. The arrest of Robert finally put his FBI cold case to an end, and all of the special agents involved were relieved to finally have this prolific bank robber behind bars once and for all. Robert spent the remainder of his life in federal prison before passing away in 2011. The Church of Scientology has seen its fair share of controversies since its conception, with many people believing that it is, in fact, a religious cult. The movement has millions of followers worldwide and a history of recruiting prominent business people and famous celebrities. In 1979, former Scientologist Michael James Meisner, then 27 years old, handed himself over to the FBI in May. He informed special agents that the organization had taken many sensitive government documents as part of a large-scale operation. An FBI criminal investigation indicated Scientologists had indeed stolen government documents, and on at least one occasion, even planted a listening device to gain influence over the Internal Revenue Service division. This was to listen to an IRS meeting in which the church's tax-exempt status was discussed. On the 8th of July of that year, FBI special agents raided Scientology offices in Los Angeles and Washington. Over 100 agents were dispatched to the Los Angeles raid, making it one of the biggest in history. The raids yielded hundreds of copies of documents that were carted back to the FBI headquarters by the truckload. They outlined the details of Operation Snow White, a plan in which Scientologists would take important government documents from around the world to help their organization gain influence. Among the many documents that special agents seized, of particular interest were those detailing the personal lives and routines of judges that were overseeing the church's various lawsuits. The FBI raid also yielded special guides on how to convert listening devices, how to fake a new identity, lists of employees who worked at federal agencies, and various organizational charts of federal institutions. In response to being raided, the Church of Scientology countersued for millions of dollars, alleging that they were being constitutionally violated, that special agents had used excessive force, and that the language used in the warrants was too vague for enforcement. But these defenses did not hold up in court. The case was solved after 7 members of the church pleaded guilty to conspiracy to obstruct justice. 5 more pleading guilty to lesser charges. Sentences ranged from 6 months to 5 years. One of the biggest FBI raids ever took place in January of 2011 in New York, Newark, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, resulting in the apprehension of 127 members of the Cosa Nostra, an organized crime ring better known as the Sicilian Mafia. Following criminal investigations that included wiretaps and informants, FBI special agents had accrued enough evidence to justify the raids against 6 leading mafia families. The criminal charges brought against them included professional hits against enemies, corruption, robbery, and an incident in which a weapon was discharged in public at a restaurant after a drink had been spilled. The criminal corruption charges included allegations that organized crime members were receiving kickbacks from dock workers who had just received their holiday bonuses. One man, John Cavallo, was caught on a listening device explaining that he was planning to end someone's life after he hadn't received his kickback. Several others were accused of being involved in the substance distribution, business extortion, trade union racketeering, loan shark operations, arson, and organizing criminal gambling rings. Salvatore Vitali, a former mafia member turned informant, was instrumental in the criminal investigation, as he admitted in an FBI interview to his involvement of ending the lives of 11 people. The evidence that he provided investigators ended the Bonanno family's reign of terror. 800 special FBI agents were involved in the raids, sending these organized criminal families a message that they would all eventually get caught and criminally prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. As a result of the massive amount of evidence gathered during the criminal investigations, many of the mobsters took FBI plea deals, resulting in relatively short prison terms. Those who chose to go to criminal trial were handed sentences that ranged between 5 and 10 years behind bars. Many true crime fans have long been fascinated by religious cults, and this recent cult story is no exception. In June of 2022, FBI raids across the USA were launched against a religious movement that was preparing to do something serious. The organization, which is known as the House of Prayer Christian Church, is described by many of its former members as acting like a religious cult. Their properties are near existing military sites, and they especially were interested in recruiting members of the armed forces. The church required not only 10% of everyone's income, but also encouraged them to give their full disability payments and re-enlistment bonuses. And that's where the true crime is believed to lie. The FBI investigation also focused on educational programs for veterans. The church accepted government grants for this educational program, even though no certificates were ever awarded. One member was reportedly left penniless after attending classes for more than 12 years. During interviews with former members, the FBI learned that these classes were held in dilapidated buildings and that students were forced to start praying as soon as cult leader Ronnie Dennis listened via conference call. Other accusations include false disability claims, veteran housing loans, and intimidation against those who escaped the cult. One former member reported that their child was nearly abducted when they wanted to escape. Most of the money that is donated by existing members is thought to end up in Dennis's possession, with very little being done to improve living conditions at the church. FBI special agents and spokespeople have declined to give further comment on the true crime story, as the case is still an ongoing criminal investigation. No arrests were made during the raid, though financial records and other files are believed to have been confiscated as evidence for future charges. It's true that crime is getting more technologically advanced as cyber attacks become more common. One of the most recent and famous examples is an ongoing investigation into a company called Pax Technology, which produces payment hardware and software, and could have facilitated attacks on American and European businesses. The true origins of the crime began when one of the largest payment processors in the United States, FIS World Pay, noticed that huge volumes of data that could contain personal information were being sent from terminals manufactured by Pax Technology. When PAC's technology could not provide an adequate response as to what these data leaks were or what was causing them, the FBI was contacted for a criminal investigation. In 2021, a massive FBI raid was carried out at 3 locations in Jacksonville, Florida. The operation was carried out with additional agents from Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection, the Department of Commerce, and the Naval Criminal Investigative Services. An FBI spokesman believed that the terminals were being used as malware droppers, where malicious files were deposited to launch future cyber attacks and collect personal information. In response, PAC's technology stated that they were not aware of any criminal activity carried out by any of their employees, and that the fraudulent criminal investigation was politically motivated. Still, they would cooperate with special agents during their criminal FBI investigation. Details about the FBI raid are largely being kept confidential as the case is ongoing. It's been speculated that agents were searching the offices for any evidence that the payment terminals were intentionally compromised with malware during their manufacture in China. The FBI raid created massive problems for PAC Technology, as their share price plummeted by 50% by the 26th of October, after news of the raid became public knowledge. The firm has, however, recovered financially and continues to provide point-of-sale terminals in over 120 countries worldwide. So far, no arrests have been made during the investigation. 63-year-old Bob Lazar, who founded an Oregon-based company called the United Nuclear Scientific Equipment and Supplies, has made a career out of many strange claims and predictions, but only one such story has gotten him raided by the FBI. In 1989, Lazar announced to the world the existence of the infamous Area 51 base. As a physicist, he claims he was tasked with reverse engineering element 115, a material that he claims is used by extraterrestrial craft as a power source. During this time, he alleges that he removed some of the element from the lab. In 2016, Lazar was raided by the FBI. If his crime is a true story, then it's one of the strangest FBI raids in history. He says special agents were looking to reclaim the element 115 sample that he took years ago while working at Area 51. He claims to have been harassed for decades by shadowy government agencies, and that on one occasion, someone took aim at his car tires while he was driving. He has also stated that his educational records at MIT and Caltech have been completely erased. According to the FBI, the raid was carried out not in response to obtaining a top-secret element, but rather part of a criminal investigation into the bizarre circumstances surrounding 31-year-old Janelle Sturzel from Houghton, Michigan. In October of 2015, Janelle fell mysteriously ill and she passed away on the 22nd of December. Foul play was suspected in her passing. It was discovered that she had ingested high levels of thallium, a chemical element used to manufacture electronics, and a substance which Lazar's company's website offers for sale. Although the criminal investigation didn't list Lazar as a suspect in Janelle's passing, FBI special agents raided his business in order to obtain the names of customers who had purchased thallium from him. During his interview, Lazar told special agents that he recently purchased the rare substance as part of a collection that was listed for sale by the sister of someone who passed away. Despite the documented proof that the FBI raid was part of an ongoing and unrelated criminal investigation, many of Lazar's followers still believe that it was a thinly veiled attempt to collect the sample of element 115. In June of 1962, the notorious Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, which is situated off the coast of California, became the scene of an FBI criminal investigation after 3 of its inmates pulled off a famous feat that had never been accomplished before. At the time, 3 hardened criminals were among the inmates at the prison. Frank Morris was serving a 10-year sentence for bank robbery, and brothers John and Clarence Anglin were each serving 35 years for a spate of robberies and multiple attempts to escape from an Atlanta penitentiary. It seemed wherever they went, a crime and investigation soon followed, and Alcatraz was no exception. Being some of the most notorious gangsters around, they all knew each other as they had spent time in prison together before. While incarcerated at Alcatraz, they devised a scheme to escape along with the fourth inmate, Alan West, who also attempted to escape from the Atlanta penitentiary. According to FBI files, the men hatched a plan to dig a tunnel to the outside of the prison where they would build a raft. They would then use the raft to make their daring escape through the icy ocean water to the mainland where they would disappear forever. To dig the tunnels, they stole blades that had been used in workshops, metal spoons from the kitchen, and a vacuum cleaner motor that they had used to construct a drill. The raft was built in the upper levels of their cell block, which was unoccupied at the time. On the 11th of June, construction of the craft was complete, and the four men readied themselves for the escape. West, however, would be left behind when he was unable to get out of his cell, but the other three men made their way out of the building to the northeast part of the island. That part of the island was out of reach of the prisoners' searchlights, giving them a chance to inflate the raft and head out towards Angel Island. The following morning, correctional officers were shocked to find the men missing, and the alarm was sounded immediately. But despite an FBI investigation and a search of the waters around the island that lasted for the next 10 days, only sections of the raft, a paddle, and a deflated life jacket were ever found. FBI agents assumed that the men succumbed to the choppy waters, but many people believe that they made it to Angel Island, and that one of the biggest FBI cases still remains unsolved. The criminal investigation into a robbery that took place at Brinks, a security company in Boston, started on the 17th of January, 1950, when 5 men carried out a well-orchestrated heist that would soon attract the attention of determined FBI agents. At around 7:30 p.m., employees were moving sacks of cash and checks to the company's safe before closing for the day when the 5 robbers silently entered the building for a raid. They had taken every precaution, wearing disguises and gloves to ensure that they weren't recognized and didn't leave any fingerprints behind. The robbers surprised the firm's employees and tied them up before stealing over $2.7 million worth of cash and checks, spawning a crime investigation into the biggest robbery that had ever been committed in the United States up to that point. During their investigation, FBI special agents learned that the robbers were very efficient and worked silently, as if they had rehearsed the heist ahead of time. The only evidence that was found at the crime scene was the rope used to tie the employees up, adhesive tape used to silence them, and a chauffeur's cap that had been dropped by one of the robbers. Brinks Incorporated offered a $100,000 reward to anyone with information on the robbers. But despite interviewing hundreds of individuals, many of whom were criminals themselves, it seemed more and more likely that the biggest unsolved robbery in the country's history would soon be added to the FBI's cold case files. But the FBI's criminal investigation finally took a turn for the better when parts of a truck thought to be used in the robbery were found at a dump in Massachusetts on the 4th of March. 2 suspects in the case, Joseph O'Keefe and Stanley Gusciora, lived in the Stoughton area, and FBI agents now strongly believed they were involved. On the 12th of June, both men were arrested when money and clothing from a previous robbery was found in their possession. O'Keefe was sentenced to 3 years in jail, while Gusciora received a sentence of 5 to 20 years. Then, after spending 6 years in prison, O'Keefe decided to confess to FBI agents. A special raid was carried out at an apartment in Dorchester, Massachusetts, where James Faherty and Thomas Richardson were hiding out and they were arrested. Following O'Keefe's confession, a further 6 men, Henry Baker, Vincent Costa, Michael Geegan, Adolph Maffei, Joseph McGinnis, and Anthony Pino were identified as part of the heist and they were arrested. At their trial, O'Keefe served as a witness, finally bringing the unsolved FBI case to a close. According to their FBI files, Bobby Wilkerson and Albert Nussbaum became friends in December of 1960 while incarcerated in a prison in Ohio. After being released from prison, the 2 men planned a robbery at a bank in Buffalo. Their tactic was to have Nussbaum act as the brains of the operation, while Wilkerson provided the muscle, a method that they repeated during their future successful robberies while evading the FBI, who was always on their case. In June of 1961, they would run into real trouble for the first time. Nussbaum had constructed 3 booby traps that were meant to distract the police while they carried out a robbery in Washington, D.C. 2 of the traps worked as planned, but the third malfunctioned, and when it was found, Nussbaum's fingerprints were lifted from the device. But they would carry out another heist in December of 1961, causing them to be added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. This time, they recruited a third robber called Peter Curry, but their criminal schemes started to fall apart when a customer at the bank managed to flee and alert the police after Wilkerson ended the life of the bank's security guard. During their escape from the crime scene, there was an exchange between Wilkerson and police officers, and all 3 robbers evaded arrest. But just 2 months after the daring robbery, Curry was tracked down and arrested. He cooperated with FBI special agents and informed them where Wilkerson and Nussbaum had hidden their weapons. But before they could be arrested, the 2 men committed 3 more robberies before they got into an argument and then parted ways. Perhaps Nussbaum's biggest mistake was contacting his estranged wife, because her mother then convinced her to help with the FBI investigation and turn him in. He was arrested on the 4th of November, 1962. Wilkerson was found 6 days later living with his girlfriend, Jackie Rose, and he was taken into custody. The subsequent criminal investigation resulted in each receiving a life term in prison after they pleaded guilty, and their FBI files were brought to a close. The FBI case involving Charles J. Lovett and James Edward Testerman began on the 12th of March, 1942, when the 2 men decided to abscond from their posts at Fort Oglethorpe in Georgia. To make their escape, the men entered the quarters of Sergeant Clifton Hall and worked him over with an iron bell that was used to call soldiers for meal times. When Hall had lost consciousness, the 2 men were free to steal 4 weapons, along with ammunition, before fleeing the scene of the crime. Their FBI files describe how they made their way to a highway where they hailed a taxi, forcing the driver to take them to Cleveland, Tennessee. Upon their arrival there, they stole the cab and traveled to Sweetwater, where they boarded a bus to Abington, Virginia. During this trip, they bought a handbag to store their weapons inconspicuously. FBI agents were, however, already looking for the 2 men, and their first lead into the criminal investigation came when they learned that Testerman had been seeing a woman in Abington, Virginia. FBI agents Hubert Tracy Jr. and Charles Tiener were added to the case, and they headed to Abington. Moments after arriving there, Tracy spotted 2 soldiers that fit Lovett and Testerman's descriptions. They followed them into a cafe where they approached the men, but when they asked for their identification, Lovett instead produced a .45 and got Special Agent Tiener in his right arm. He then turned his attention to Special Agent Tracy, who collapsed to the floor and never got up. Lovett and Testerman then stole a car and attempted to flee, but their path was blocked by a policeman, and they were only able to flee the crime scene after more mayhem. They made their way to a house on the outskirts of Abington, where they hid in the basement, but FBI officers and members of the police force quickly surrounded the property. The 2 were ultimately forced from their hideout after a tear gas raid, and they were finally apprehended. Both men were found guilty of murder in the 1st degree and were sentenced to life in prison. They would each receive an additional 12 years behind bars for 3 additional crimes, finally bringing this notorious FBI case to closure. On the 3rd of December, 1937, FBI agents in Indianapolis were informed that the State Bank of Lapel in Indiana had been robbed the night before. Crime scene investigation files state that the burglars had made their way into the building by loosening the cover of one of the bank's windows. They then attempted to break into the bank's vault with an acetylene torch, but before they could do so, they were encountered by an employee. They fled the bank after stealing just $5.45, which was about $100 back then, leaving the torch and some of their equipment behind. An FBI investigation was launched, but before any suspects could be identified, 3 more bank robberies took place using the same tools and methods. 2 of the robberies were carried out at the same bank in Indiana, but on the second attempt, a night watchman spotted the robbers, causing them to flee without their equipment again. The guard managed to identify one of the robbers as Fred Steffler, and he relayed this information to FBI agents. This led the FBI to believe that Steffler was working with 2 other men, Joseph Earlywine and William Hewlett. The investigation led to Earlywine and Hewlett being traced to a farm near Penfield in Illinois, and FBI agents placed them under special surveillance in hopes that they would lead them to Steffler. But when this didn't come to fruition, it was decided that the 2 men should be arrested. FBI Special Agent William Ramsey approached the farm, along with members of the Indiana State Police. They quickly spotted Hewlett, who was plowing a field, and he was arrested without incident. Special Agent Ramsey, a local sheriff, and 2 Indiana State officers then raided the house and located Earlywine, who refused to be taken alive. Ramsey would unfortunately pass away in the hospital the next day as well. On the 2nd of May, 1938, Steffler was spotted by FBI special agents at his house in Danville, Illinois, and he was taken into custody to be interrogated. Steffler provided useful information into the criminal investigation, telling FBI agents that he and Earlywine had committed several burglaries together. He also stated that Hewlett was not a part of these crimes, and Hewlett was acquitted of all charges. The case was finally solved after Steffler was tried and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Almost 50 years ago, Barbara Jean Alexovich vanished while walking home late at night. Her disappearance was added to the FBI files, but it remained an unsolved mystery. Barbara was 24 years old in October of 1973. She had married a man named Bill Alexovich sometime earlier and moved to the village of Bath. Bath was a small village without much crime, but in 1973, it would be the scene of multiple true crime stories. Barbara vanished on October 3, 1973. That evening, she and Bill attended the Elks Club dinner, but Barbara didn't want to stay for the meeting afterwards. She left at about 10:45 p.m. for the short walk home, but never made it. Authorities were alerted when Bill came home to find Barbara missing. All her belongings were left behind, and there was no indication she ever made it home. 50 years later, no trace of Barbara has ever been found. About 2 weeks after Barbara vanished, Bath was hit with another disappearance. This one didn't remain unsolved for long. On October 21st, Frederick Bush, Richard Washburn, and James Markison were out drinking together. At some point, there was an altercation, and Bush took Markison's life, and he and Washburn disposed of the body at an animal shelter. It wasn't long before they were caught. During questioning, Washburn told police he and Bush had previously been talking about a woman from Bath who was a missing person. Bush allegedly told Washburn that he had done that one too. Barbara was never named, but hers was the only unsolved disappearance in the area. For years, the authorities believed Bush was responsible for Barbara's disappearance, but there was never any evidence and the case went cold. Recently, local authorities opened up the case again. The FBI Forensic Genetic Genealogy team had found a match in DNA evidence for another crime. The criminal in question was Richard Davis. The crime had taken place in Montana, but Davis had lived in Bath at the time of Barbara's disappearance. Authorities now believe Davis is the main suspect in Barbara's case, and that he may be responsible for many unsolved crimes. Whether he would have stuck so close to home remains unknown. By the time Davis was identified as a suspect, he had already passed away. It seems unlikely this FBI case will be solved until more evidence, especially Barbara herself, is found. Barbara is described as 5'6" and weighing 140 pounds when she vanished. She was wearing a green sweater, a white blouse, and a plaid skirt. Her familial DNA has been added to the FBI's Violent Crime Apprehension Program, which will allow it to be compared against the DNA of any Jane Does or other remains found in the future. In 2022, FBI investigators joined the search to solve the unexplained mystery of Amanda DeGee's disappearance. It's now 8 years since Amanda vanished, and investigators believe she met with foul play. Her family still holds on to hope that she could be found alive and one day return home. Amanda was a 28-year-old mother of 2 when she vanished. She was close to her mother, who she lived with, and her older sister, who lived nearby. But on June 3, 2014, she walked out of her Upper Darby home and never returned. When she was younger, Amanda planned to go into nursing. She had to change those plans when she got pregnant and was instead studying to become a medical assistant. But later in her pregnancy, she caught an infection which required surgery and strong pain medication. That was when an addiction to prescription medications began. Amanda still had the support of her family, who tried to help get her clean. According to her family, she continued to hold down jobs and paid her bills. At the end of May of 2014, the family took a trip to Disney World. The plan was for Amanda to go see a doctor once they returned, and then possibly begin another stint in rehab. It's not clear how open to this idea Amanda was, but she would never go through with it. On the morning of June 3rd, about 4 days after the Disney World trip, Amanda's mother checked in on her before she headed to work. She asked Amanda to do a few chores, then left. By the time she came home, Amanda was gone. Amanda left behind all of her belongings, though some sources claim that she took her cell phone with her. She didn't answer any calls, and none of her family would hear from her again. It was very out of character, but Amanda wasn't officially reported missing until August. In the FBI file, it mentioned Amanda had a history of prostitution and used illegal substances as well as prescription medications. Due to this lifestyle, investigators believe this unsolved cold case could be a criminal investigation. It's known Amanda was alive about a week after she was last seen by her family. She allegedly picked up someone else's prescription from a pharmacy. Since then, there have been no confirmed sightings of her. Amanda is described as being 5'1" to 5'3" and weighs between 100 and 120 pounds. She had many tattoos, including the name Tommy on her chest and the letters MF on the inside of her lower lip. Anyone with information on this case should contact Upper Darby Police at 610-734-7693 or the local FBI office. The unsolved true crime case of Sandra Jean Carrian is a disturbing mystery which may involve a religious end-of-the-world cult investigated by the FBI. Before 1985, Sandra was known as a perfectly ordinary housewife from Wichita Falls, Texas. She was married to a disabled World War II veteran, and they had 2 children together. But that relationship wasn't one that was going to last. According to news reports from 1985, Sandra planned to divorce her husband. After she left him, she would be welcomed at the Cap of the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord. The CSA was a dangerous cult based in Arkansas. It was being investigated by the FBI. How Sandra came to know about the cult isn't clear, but it captured her attention. She was last seen alive in Wichita Falls with a man named Mitchell Rolston. Rolston was an associate of the cult. Shortly after she was last seen, her body was discovered. It was March 19, 1985. 2 maintenance workers were walking along the Turner Turnpike on the outskirts of Oklahoma City when they found Sandra. She had suffered multiple wounds from a bladed object. Investigators believed that she'd been dragged to that location, and more than one person was involved in her passing. Rolston was questioned about the crime, but apparently wasn't able to give police much information. The case went cold, but Sandra's name would appear again as the FBI investigation into the cult continued. In April of 1985, there was a raid on the CSA compound in Arkansas. Among the items recovered during the raid was a 1957 Chevrolet driven by an individual described as a CSA member and prime suspect in Sandra's case. Weapons similar to the ones used to take Sandra's life were also found. The FBI files note Sandra's 2 children were also at the compound. Since then, the trail has gone cold. More than 35 years later, authorities have started another push for information. It's believed someone knows who was responsible for Sandra's passing, and there's hope the amount of time that has passed will encourage them to come forward. On June 14, 1997, Helena Ret walked away from a family celebration in Little Lake, Michigan, and hasn't been seen since. Her case has since been added to the FBI's VICAP database, but it seems her family are no closer to locating her than they were the day that she vanished. Helena went by the name of Anne and was 45 years old when she vanished. It hadn't been an easy few years for her. She grew up in the area of Gwen, Michigan, but had moved away some years earlier with her husband. He passed away not long before Anne went missing. According to newspaper reports at the time, Anne was despondent and had dropped to about 100 pounds, and the same reports claimed that she was recovering from a stroke, something left out of her FBI file, though it's noted that she had a stutter. Anne had come back to Michigan about 3 weeks before she vanished. On June 14th, she attended an anniversary celebration at her sister's house in Gwen. At about 5:30 p.m., Anne decided to leave the party to go for a walk. This wasn't unusual behavior for her, and her family wasn't worried. She knew the area well, and despite any recent health issues, she would often walk for miles at a time. After about half an hour, her family decided that it was time to go check on her. No sign of Anne could be found. Anne was reported missing to local authorities, and a search began. Multiple organizations, a police helicopter, canine units, and a number of volunteers joined the search to solve this missing person case. It wasn't long before the case went cold, and the search was called off. Police needed more tips if they wanted to solve the case. A few dozen tips were called in, which took investigators around the country. The FBI also joined the investigation, adding Anne's missing person file to their database. One tip involved a woman suffering from amnesia who was found in Arizona with no memory of who she was or how she had gotten there. But it would appear none of the tips led investigators to Anne. It's not known if foul play was involved. Anne knew the local area very well, but she may have also been suffering from dementia according to her FBI file. Even with the searches, it's possible she wandered off and is still waiting to be found. Anne was 5'5" and weighed 100 pounds when she vanished. She was wearing a white sweatshirt with a pink heart, blue jeans, blue tennis shoes, and a red and black headscarf. Anyone with information on the case is asked to contact the local FBI office. Donita Wilkerson has been missing for 2 years. Her family, including her 6 children, have spent those 2 years searching for answers to this unsolved mystery. A member of the FBI task force has been working the case, but so far it seems authorities are no closer to an answer. Donita was 44 years old when she disappeared. She was last seen on June 21st, 2020. She was staying with her brother in Evansville, Indiana, and when she left home, she told her family she would be back soon. It was the last time her family would see her, and for a time, what happened next was a mystery. When Donita hadn't been in contact with her family by the next day, they grew worried. It was very unlike her to just vanish. She was reported missing on June 22nd, and an investigation began. It soon emerged that she had been caught on CCTV at an East Side motel in the city. She was seen getting into a silver 2004 Chevrolet Suburban with tinted windows. The vehicle left the motel at 8:16 a.m. The lead didn't take investigators to Donita, though. Authorities were able to track down the owner of the vehicle, though the vehicle itself was never found. The identity of the owner was never made public, but Donita's family believe they know who it was. According to the family, Donita's ex-boyfriend had been violent towards her. They were in an on-again, off-again relationship, which was off at the time of the disappearance. He had sent her threatening text messages in the weeks before she vanished, which caused Donita to fear for her life. The ex-boyfriend's nephew had also sent threatening messages. He was allegedly the owner of the vehicle. FBI and police claim the owner has been uncooperative, but he has not been named as a suspect in her disappearance. Today, Donita would be 46 years old. She was 5'3" at the time of her disappearance and weighed 145 pounds. She was last seen wearing a red V-neck t-shirt, blue denim shorts, dark socks, and sandals. Anyone with information on the case is asked to contact the FBI Indianapolis office at 317-595-4000. On the 24th of March, 1978, a true crime mystery unfolded at the Truman Presidential Library in Independence, Missouri, and the culprits still remain at large today. On the morning of the 24th of March, security guard Thomas Williams and a maintenance worker, Neil Morris, were on duty at the museum. At around 6:20 a.m., the two men saw a black Oldsmobile parked across the street, and Williams saw a woman get out of the car before walking around it, getting back in and driving away. A few minutes later, an alarm sounded inside the building, signaling the start of a heist that would be completed in just 45 seconds. A window next to the museum's front door was smashed, and once the robbers were inside, they helped themselves to a collection of blades that had been given to President Truman by foreign heads of state. The blades also contained a number of precious stones, including diamonds, rubies, and sapphires that were embedded in the hilts and scabbards. As soon as Williams heard the alarm sounding, he ran from the north to the south side of the library, but found that the robbers had locked the doors from the inside. Upon investigation, it was found that the thieves left no fingerprints behind, though investigators did find 2 sets of footprints outside the building. FBI special agents had no idea who carried out the heist, but they were certain that the culprits had knowledge of the museum's security procedures. It's believed that the blades were either sold to a private collector on the black market, or that they had been melted down to remove and sell the precious metals that they contained. The FBI has now offered a reward of $10,000 to anyone with information that will lead them to the recovery of the stolen items, or the robbers who carried out the daring heist. No suspects have ever been named in the unsolved case, and for now at least, it remains an unsolved true crime mystery. In October of 2015, 32-year-old Vanessa O'Rourke from Harleysville, Pennsylvania, informed her family that she'd been diagnosed with a form of brain cancer, but soon she would become the focus of a criminal investigation. At the time, Vanessa was a medical student at Temple University, where she was undergoing training to become a brain surgeon. Soon after giving the unfortunate news to her family, Vanessa set up a GoFundMe campaign to help pay for experimental treatments that she needed to have done in Australia. 40 people, some of whom were family and friends of Vanessa's, ultimately contributed a total of $11,740 to the page. Vanessa then used the money to travel to Australia as expected, but unbeknownst to her contributors, she spent the money on personal expenses and leisure activities without ever receiving any cancer treatments. It would later come to light that Vanessa had entered Australia on a visitor's visa and stayed in the country illegally, landing a job at a private company in Queensland after claiming to be a qualified doctor. But when holes started to appear in her story, Queensland authorities launched an investigation after receiving a tip from investigators in the United States, in which it was revealed that she had fled the country because she was wanted on unrelated theft charges. In July of 2019, an Australian Administrative Appeals Tribunal ruled that Vanessa could stay in the country, though she pleaded guilty to charges of fraud and forgery. In August of 2019, she was placed in immigrant detention, though it isn't known whether or not she'll be brought back to the US to face charges. Special Agent Michael J. Driscoll, who's in charge of the FBI's Philadelphia division, stated that the FBI is looking to hold Vanessa accountable for the financial fraud that she committed, and reiterated the reprehensible nature in which she took advantage of the kind hearts and open wallets of her benefactors. In 2019, 55-year-old Moises Gonzalez was working as a cardiologist in Venezuela, but he would soon become the subject of an FBI file when it became apparent that he was dealing in cybercrime. In May of 2022, the Justice Department revealed that Gonzalez is the creator of 2 ransomware strains that he had named Jigsaw V2 and Thanos. He then made the tools available for purchase or rental by other cyber criminals. Added to this, he also taught his fellow scammers how to use the programs effectively against their intended victims. The 2.0 version of the Jigsaw ransomware was created by Gonzalez to serve as an update to an older program that was created by someone else. The Thanos program included features such as customization of the ransom node, selecting the specific files that would be encrypted on the victim's computer, and multiple options that aid in masking the program's malicious code from being found by antivirus detection software. Gonzalez rented the Thanos tool via a licensing model, and he created an affiliate program that allowed his fellow cyber criminals to use the tool in exchange for a share of any profits made through the successful ransomware attacks. To gain more customers, he advertised the Thanos tool in online forums that were frequented by cyber criminals. In these ads, he bragged about the ransomware created with the Thanos tool and how it's virtually undetectable by antivirus programs, since the ransomware would delete itself after encryption on the victim's system had been completed. It's believed that at least 38 copies of the tool were sold, but once the FBI started their criminal investigation into the scary mystery, they found a PayPal account and cryptocurrency account registered to Gonzalez. They were also able to find a Gmail address in his name, his driver's license, and his address in Venezuela. It's currently not known where Gonzalez is hiding out, but in March of 2022, the FBI requested that an arrest warrant be issued, as he's made multiple trips to the United States in the past. If Gonzalez is ever tracked down, he'll face up to 5 years in prison for charges of attempted computer intrusions. He'll also face charges of conspiracy to commit computer intrusions, for which the sentence also holds a maximum of 5 years behind bars. The true crime story involving George Edward Wright began on the 23rd of November, 1962, when he, Walter McGee, Elizabeth Roswell, and Julio De Leon orchestrated a string of daring robberies. The first of the robberies was committed at the Sands Motel in Englishtown, New Jersey, where they made off with a total of $200. Following that, they traveled to the Collingswood Esso gas station on Route 33 in Wall Township. During the second robbery, which took place at 9:25 p.m., McGee ended the life of a 42-year-old Walter Patterson from Howell Township. The second robbery added $70 to their total. All 4 of the robbers were tracked down and arrested 2 days later, with Wright pleading no contest to a charge of murder, and he was sentenced to 15 to 30 years in prison. However, on the 19th of August, 1970, at around 11 p.m., Wright and 3 fellow inmates walked out of the Bayside State Prison during a bed check. They then stole the warden's car and fled to Detroit, where they hid out. Then on the 31st of July, 1972, Wright, along with George Brown, Joyce Brown, Melvin McNair, and Jean Carroll Allen McNair boarded a plane in Detroit that was headed for Miami. Wright was dressed as a priest and used the alias of Reverend Larry Darnell Burgess, carrying a hollowed-out Bible in which he concealed a firearm. As the plane approached Miami, the group seized the plane and demanded that FBI agents dressed in bathing suits deliver a $1 million ransom to the plane. The FBI did as they were asked, and after the plane's passengers were set free unharmed, they ordered the pilot to fly to Boston. Once in Boston, the plane was refueled and an international navigator was added to the crew. They then flew the plane to Algeria, where they sought political asylum, and the pilot reported that upon landing, McNair said, quote, "We're famous, send us a copy of your paper." All 4 of the hijackers were taken into custody in Algeria, but released a few days later. However, the Algerian government confiscated and returned the $1 million ransom money to the US government, and after pleas by the robbers to have the money returned to them failed, they vanished into thin air. It's believed that they traveled to France by ship in 1973, where they obtained new identities. Wright's 4 accomplices were eventually tracked down in Paris and sentenced to 5 years in prison each. Wright was eventually arrested in Portugal after his fingerprints from the New Jersey prison were matched to those on his Portuguese ID card. The US government asked that he be extradited to serve the remaining 22 years of his sentence, but this request was denied, and he's thought to still be living in Portugal after marrying an English-Portuguese translator with whom he had 2 children, and it seems unlikely he'll ever face the consequences of his crimes in the United States. In 1973, 25-year-old Mary Schay had graduated from the University of Minnesota with honors, and she was ready to start studying for her master's degree. But she would soon become involved in a horror story that would cost her her life. Early the following year, she heard about an art show that was being held in Chicago, and she decided to hitchhike to Madison, Wisconsin, from where she would travel to Chicago. And so on the 15th of February, she set out after saying goodbye to her roommates in Minneapolis, but she never made it to her intended destination. Later that same day, a man named Dennis Anderson was driving around in Dunn County, Wisconsin, when he noticed a gold-colored compact car parked by the side of a dead-end street. He noticed 2 men fighting nearby, so he decided to pass them by. But as it kept bothering him, he eventually decided to go back to the scene. But by the time he got back, the car was gone, and he noticed someone lying in a ditch next to the road. He sped home, asking his neighbor to accompany him, and headed back to the ditch where they found Mary deceased. They ran to a nearby house and called the sheriff's department, who found tire tracks from the gold-colored car in the snow, though they were unable to take a usable plaster mold due to the freshly fallen snow. Near to the scene, they found a black and orange stocking cap that had contained strands of hair. However, Mary's coat and purse were missing. An autopsy revealed that she had been attacked with a thin blade, but she had fought back and skin samples were recovered from under her nails. The strands of hair were compared to 12 possible suspects, but they were found to not be a match, and with no further leads to follow up on, the case went cold. Her case has never been solved, and no further suspects have ever been named in her murder. The criminal investigation into Mary's murder did, however, cause the FBI to start a campaign in which they discouraged people from hitchhiking, as it had become too dangerous to accept rides from strangers. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.